Bruno's RPG Talk. Oh yeah.
Hey all, welcome. In this video, I'm going to talk about evil fantasy races and the discussion that's currently happening um, about whether that's a problematic racist idea or not. The idea that there are some evil fantasy races and fantasy settings and they're automatically evil, and is that like a racist notion? And when I say racist notion, I mean like applying to real life. Um, so First of all, before I get into my opinion, I do want to. Well, no, I guess I'll start with my opinion, but I also have a little bullet point there. However, um, so my stance on this, and please stay for the rest of the video, I'll explain more, is that the notion of an evil fantasy race like orcs, goblins, etc., is not inherently racist in real life terms. The caveat I want to mention right now is that I am sure that people can point me to examples where I would consider that example problematic. I am convinced of it because, um, you know, in real life, some people are racist, whether they realize it or not, and they will project that into whatever material they create and consume. So, of course, I'm sure and that someone could point to me to one example here or there where even I would be like, yeah, that's bad. However, that's not what we're doing here. I'm, I'm not gonna use the fact that some people have misused the evil fantasy races as a way to condemn the whole general idea. I am here to explain why it is not a problematic notion, quite the opposite. It's the opposite of it. And for anyone who's wondering what I'm going on about, please stick with me. Okay, so first of all, the word allegory. A story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. Definition is from Oxford Languages. Okay, cool. Very well. So the thing about evil fantasy races, or as some games have started calling them, ancestries, you can't really call them species because a lot of them can procreate together, like half elves, half orcs, etc. I guess dwarves, you could say, are a different species since they don't procreate with any of the other ones. Anyway, at least in most fantasy games. So but yeah, so I do understand that when you use the word race, yeah, that might be a bit of a charged word in this day and age. But for example, like when you think about orcs in the Lord of the Rings, there's really good arguments that Tolkien fought during his era. He fought in World War II. So there's an argument there that orcs are the Germans. They represent the Germans in World War II. They represent Nazis. Okay? In a way, in a weird way, when you watch Indiana Jones movies or whatever, if we're gonna want to go there, like Nazis are the evil fantasy race, right? Like they're the when you see someone in a Nazi uniform, they're evil right away. There's no debate to be had. If you're Indiana Jones and you see a Nazi coming your way, you're gonna shoot that guy. You know that guy's a bad guy. There's no confusion or debate. What does that mean? Well, it means for a really fun, rollicking adventure because Indiana Jones knows that like he shot a Nazi. He didn't like shoot someone he wasn't sure or not if that was a good or a bad guy, and stuff like that. And yes, I am aware that in real life war, human beings sometimes are stuck in sides they don't necessarily want to be in, but they're still fighting for that side. So so my point being is, it becomes a cathartic, fun adventure. when Indiana Jones is shooting Nazis, he's shooting intolerance, he's shooting bad guys, he's shooting racism. So I'm gonna bring it back to now maybe a more comfortable subject, which is the fantasy races. Someone recently brought up online on Twitter that Yetis and D&D, like, they were disturbed by the fact that some adventurers and books are mentioned to wear like Yeti fangs as a necklace because Yetis have their own language, therefore they're sentient. And then someone else, of course, commented that, oh, it's an example of colonialism or something because the adventurers show up and kill the Yetis and grab their stuff. They show up in their land or something. And I kind of brought up, well, you know what? I'm not this Yeti expert in the lore of. It wasn't the Forgotten Realms setting or D&D at least, but I said like I'm not an expert in Yetis in D&D or anything, but I remember them from the Drizzt Do'Urden novels by R.A. Salvatore or Salvatore, I'm not sure. And in the Crystal Shard, in that novel, where Yetis are actually really aggressive, they just attack people on sight, so it's self-defense to kill them. Like it's not like humans and elves and dwarves were like, hey, let's go kill those people who live in the mountains. It was more like, these Yetis are attacking people who live nearby. We have to deal with that. So it's self-defense, actually. And someone else commented, and I don't know if they're being sarcastic or not, but I think it applied. And the person commented, so the Yetis are actually anti-immigrant extremists. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of how they were written. So the Yetis are the ones who are like, I don't want these people around my land, around these parts, like the way it was portrayed in at least whatever I read, and what little I read of Yetis in D&D, and specifically in Faerun, Forgotten Realms, it was more like Yetis, they don't want other people to exist near them. Yetis are actually, in this case, the allegory, if you want to make one, is not that the settlers in that place of Faerun, I forgot the name of the place where Drizzt and the others started off, but in the snowy area of Forgotten Realms, anyway. But it's not that they are like, oh, let's go colonize the Yetis and let's go exterminate them for profit. It's that the Yetis are like, oh, we're gonna kill you on sight if you're not one of us. So it's kind of funny how people wanna find problems so bad that they're actually grabbing one example of anti-immigrant extremism, the Yetis, because they're sentient, they have a language, and they're gonna kill anyone who's not a Yeti on sight. They're the racist ones, and they're like, it's kind of like this like flagellation of like, oh, what problematic aspect can we find in our hobby that we, like flagellating like what's wrong with our hobby? And there, I'm not saying there's nothing to be discussed, and again, I am sure you can find examples of evil fantasy races done wrong, where I would agree with you. That's the problem. I'm just saying the concept itself is not problematic. You can apply it in a problematic way, but you can apply anything in a problematic way. I'm going to give an example. Captain America punching Nazis in the old comics is not problematic. That said, the characterization and interpretation of Japanese people, even though Japanese were at fault in World War II, like the interpretation of Japanese people, that was problematic, even, or Holy Terror, the comic by Frank Miller. I didn't have an issue with the concept. I even bought the comic when it came out, but then when I read it, I was disgusted, and I actually threw the comic. So sometimes it's not what you're doing; it's how you do it. Because Holy Terror, like, I'm all for the idea of a vigilante kicking ass and giving retribution to terrorists, but the way it was handled, it was like a bit problematic, so anyway, so my point is, some people are so like, it's not, it's what you do with it. The allegory can go either way, like like, it's just people are looking for problems so hard, and instead of going like, oh, look, Yetis are so racist, they attack others on sight, they go like, oh, are the adventurers actually like colonizers? No, they're not. Like, if the humans and elves and dwarves were not originally from that area, which I think they were anyway, at least the dwarves. Anyway, again, I'm not an expert in Forgotten Realms lore. Um, them going there doesn't mean they deserve to be killed by the Yetis. It's self defense. Like the same way many immigrants who try to cross over to another country don't deserve to be killed for it. We're clear, like we're agreeing on that, right? Okay. Okay. Now, one thing that's so strange to me, it is so odd to me, is that so many people seem to, even the people who are saying that it's a problematic idea, seem to be okay with like completely evil demons and undead. It's like for demons and undead, now they get it because there's a supernatural element. Now they go like, oh yeah, totally, totally. Like, they represent, like, demons represent sinful, evil behavior. Undead or either mindless, or they represent predatory behavior or whatever. So it's like, okay, I'm not saying anyone, but I swear every example I found of people who thought that evil fantasy races are problematic made an exception for demons and undead. And I'm sure there's others who would disagree, but to me, I kind of find that weird because we're still talking about sentient beings, right? No matter the explanation you give it, like, you're either for or against a notion. And then if you're for demons and undead being evil, no matter what, um, gnolls in D&D are these like hyena creatures, and they have like their evil hyena god. So it's like, well, if these are the race that got created, or I don't know if the gods created races in that way in D&D. I don't remember right now, but it's just that, like, well, you yeah, it's a fantasy element. Like D&D has alignments, for example. It has like actual evil, actual good, stuff like that. So everyone is supernatural in that way compared to a world. Like a normal human has an alignment, is defined in a way supernaturally that is in a real life is not. Now I'm turning over stuff that other people have said, but I'm getting to some other stuff that might be a bit more original, uh, as far as as I could see. So to me, it is kind of weird that you make this exception, because then you're still talking about sentient beings, and you're still talking. It's still determinism, if you want. Like, oh yeah, demons and that, totally. So why? um, to me, that weakens the argument of whoever. Like, I will listen to arguments about like, oh, evil fantasy races are problematic, but then if you go and tell me, oh, but demons are undead are fine, I'm like, well, you yourself are destroying your own argument. You're discussing sentient beings, except maybe mindless zombies and stuff like that. If you're able to understand, like, oh, these demons represent greed, lust, hatred, jealousy, like, okay, so you are give like, it's an allegory for this problem that in these games you can cathartically just go head on and attack these problems. Like, if you are against sexism, the drow are all like, well, okay, now they're doing like this retcon where there's many drow, but let's say the traditional classic evil drow in D&D, they're sexist. You can attack sexism that way. Okay, now it might be touchy with some people because the sexism is towards the males, and like that's a lot to unpack. But that's one example amongst many. Like, you can like, evil fantasy races are meant to represent an evil that players can cathartically attack head on. If everyone understands that you're not like, an evil fantasy race is not like this comparison to an actual human being or an actual race or culture. If you go like, and I'm going to give examples very soon. I'm going to give concrete examples of very good storytelling by very good writers where the evil fantasy race is an allegory. Well, one case, and then I'm going to go to a more complex case where it's a very good writer, but it's not the same. So I just find that weird. Now, I do want to say also, it's kind of bizarre, right? When you look at Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, the vampires in those books commit very evil acts. And Lestat, Louis, Claudia, they commit evil acts. And I know that Lestat afterwards becomes softer towards humans and all that, but however, we still feel for Claudia when she's killed, all those things. So we get into familiarity. So what happens? You have these evil fantasy races, and then R.A. and then Anne Rice writes about vampires, and you feel for vampires. R.A. Salvatore writes about Drizzt Do'Urden, the one drow who's good, and we get into the drow culture, and then like you see more drow, and then by necessity, this you have more complex characters. Not all of them are like cookie cutter villains, and so as soon as you have familiarity, of course you're gonna have complexity, which is not bad. But then through complexity, people kind of start feeling like you have more and more exceptions, right, to the rule of all evil. And then it does become a bit messy to untangle, because once you start having a lot of neutral characters, or evil but sympathetic characters, because we're seeing the world through a point of view, then it becomes a bit more difficult to just go like they're evil. Which here, it's kind of like true. It's kind of like in real life when people who fight racism, one thing they do is, one of the best ways to fight racism is to teach the racist person about the other, and so they become more familiar, and they realize like there's nothing to fear, right? um so in that sense, that becomes very real, where the more you familiarize yourself with this evil fantasy race, and the more writers add nuance and all that, we end up feeling like we care about these characters, so we don't want to judge them as evil anymore, even if they might. Like if you read Interview the Vampire, like we feel so bad for Claudia when she dies, but if we were to meet Claudia in real life, we would like I would want her dead. You know what I mean? I'm reading the book. I would want Claudia dead because she would kill me. So she would. I mean, I don't remember if she had a preference in her prey or whatever, but you get my point, right? So this very real life aspect of when you familiarize yourself with another culture and people and all that does apply to these evil fantasy races, which is why some people end up finding it's icky, right? But then I would argue that when that happens, you stray away from the allegory, which is it's a very valid storytelling device too. I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm just saying, like, as a default, using evil fantasy races as allegory is not a racist idea. It's not racist. Um, and I'm gonna give examples now. And it's kind of funny because they address vampires who are normally considered an undead supernatural evil, but in the two cases I'm gonna show, they're scientific, they're biological. There's nothing supernatural about them. Spoilers. So, first one is Fever Dream, an excellent book written by George R.R. Martin. And the main human character in this book, and spoilers, very light spoilers. It's now I'm really bad with history, but it's set during a time where slavery was legal in the United States. It's set in the United States during the time when slavery was legal. And if you have difficulty with certain like racial slurs, the book doesn't shy away from it. So just content warning, whatever you want to call it. Well, yeah, content warning is the term. Like it's really, sometimes it gets really ugly. Like when some humans talk about other human beings. It gets really, really ugly, this book. It doesn't shy away from the reality of history. Nor should it if it wants to address an issue head on. And the vampires in this, the way they treat humans and all that, the main human protagonist, who's white, realizes through dealing with vampires how wrong it is for white people to treat black people as slaves in the way they do. So the vampires become an allegory for people preying on others, taking advantage of others, being predatory, being monsters towards others. These vampires are not supernatural in any way, if that matters to you. They are just, biological humanoids, beings. They're just a different species than humans, or different. I don't know what you. I think anyway. They're another branch of that descended from apes. I don't know what the term would be. And the way they act, they're sentient, and they're vampires who are complex. There's not just good and evil vampires, but at the same time, they do inherently have a nature to be predatory. And even the vampires who try to fight that come across certain challenges in how they are wired, if you will. Which, again, some people might go, oh, that's determinism, that's wrong, and all that. But the vampires are an allegory for, in this book, like trying to do better. Even though you might have flaws as a person, even though you might have things in your nature that might not be, um, ideal. As a person, as a thinking person, you always have a choice to do the right thing. So that's one thing it addresses on the vampire side. And then also vampires, through their predatory behavior, make a character realize just how wrong, um, just racism and slavery is. Because when he feels that way, when he feels, when that main character, I forget his name, when the human main character feels so powerless, regarding the vampires, it's really good writing, this book. It's just like this realization for him. So you can use these concepts to fight racism. You can use them to cathartically fight racism head on, or to address very complex subject matters, if you will, in a safe environment, because you're not dealing with real life people or cultures or whatever. You're dealing with vampires. So through vampires, you can discuss a lot of societal issues, past and present, and potentially future. And now I'm gonna like give an example of just outright evil, vampire who's not supernatural, and it just works. And if there's an allegory there, I can find it. It's just good writing. And if anyone thinks that book is racist or has an issue with it, no, the writer's super progressive. So it's Blindside by Peter Watts. Peter Watts is a very progressive author who even has used in other books, like if it matters to anyone, non-binary pronouns. Not in this book that I can remember, but in another book. Anyway, so you're not dealing with like an old school person, and this is a progressive writer, and his vampires in this are just evil. But they're not evil as much as they're just, again, they're predators. They prey on humans, and what the scientific explanations that are given for vampires is super interesting. For example, they do age, but they're able to go into hibernation for long periods of time. So when they go into hibernation, everything slows down, including their aging. So that's why they might seem to humans around that like they haven't aged. They're very intelligent. They're way more intelligent than humans, but their issue is they can't collaborate with each other. If I remember correctly, their instincts just take over. They don't want, they meet for procreation, and then they go apart right away. And it's interesting because they even explain the crucifix, where in nature, what do you call them in English? The angles, straight angles, I think 90-degree angles anyway, gives them seizures, and they're normally not found in nature. But when humans started building things, that's kind of what made them go extinct. The amount of 90-degree angles they would find that would give them seizures. So the crucifix, having all of those. So that was like an interesting take on the crucifix. Not being this power of faith, but just a very scientific explanation. And then when they, in this book, it's a sci-fi book in space, and it deals with intelligence and different types of intelligence. For example, like the fact that not they say they meet, because they meet another alien life form in this book, and the life form is not it is not aware of its own existence. It's like an intelligence that's not what's the word, aware of itself. For example, I know I am a person. So what do you call it? Not sentience. Wow, I can't believe I forgot the word. But anyway, like this part that we know ourselves as a person, as me. Yeah, I forgot the word. Okay. It's not required for intelligence. It's not required. Or maybe it is sentient. Yeah. Okay. I think it's sentient. I might make a mistake. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. So actually, one interesting thing that Peter Watts proposes is that the brain is composed of many parts, and the part that it's aware of itself is actually a really dumb part of the brain, and the other, like, because he studied how brains work and theories and all that. I don't know how much is theory and how much is confirmed by science, but according to Peter Watts, like this part that's aware, like this part that is I am, is actually a really dumb part of the brain, and the other part of the brain does all the hard work and sends like information to this really dumb part, and it kind of it kind of says that just being aware of yourself takes a lot of brain power, and we'd be smarter without it. That the idea that sentience makes us smarter is really wrong. Um, and then it goes into a lot of things that animals do. I mean, some of it is in the novel, but other stuff is what Peter Watts says in interviews. Like stuff that animals do that are way smarter than their behavior, or IQ as we understand it would allow for in nature. So anyway, and it's a trick that works. It's like sometimes something happens in our lives and we're like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have trusted this person, or I knew I shouldn't have gone there, and that's actually part of the brain like trying to send information to the part of us that's aware, and we're just blocking it out through our own thoughts. And like, I really like this song, I am hungry right now, so we're having these thoughts that are going to block other information coming in. And I remember when I was reading, as a side note, when I was reading this book, I was many years ago. I was a Scary Garden museum at night, and we had like this huge set of keys, and like this door would require this key, and sometimes the lock would be upside down, and sometimes you have to turn left, others right. So there's like, the set was like this big of keys. And it's like which key goes to which door, up or down. You have to look at the lock, and then do you turn left or right? And some doors it didn't matter, and others it did. So every time I would come across a door, it would like take forever to go through the keys because it was really hard. Like I wasn't there for long enough to memorize them all. But as I was reading this book during my breaks, from doing the rounds in the museum, I was really interested, fascinated by this idea that this sentient, self-aware part of the brain takes up a lot of brain power, takes up a lot of room. And has it ever happened to you that you know how to get somewhere without thinking, but then someone asks you how to get there, you forget how to get there, or stuff like that? So what I started doing was just every time I would reach a door, I would just grab my set of keys and I would kind of like stop thinking about it. And it was crazy. I would grab the right key and put it in the lock in the right direction, and turn in the right way. It was crazy. But if someone asked me which one it was and to do it thinking about it, I wouldn't have been able to. So I tested out the idea that a lot of the brain knows what it has to do. We're just like in the way. Our self-awareness is in the way of the brain doing its job sometimes. So they face aliens that are like that. And the vampires are from Earth. They were extinct, but science brought them back. And they have a vampire in the ship with the humans because they're so smart, it's useful, but they're basically sociopaths who feed on humans as a default, as their nature. And well, maybe I mentioned too much. I don't want to spoil too much, but basically, this is a book where it does give a scientific explanation for vampires and, if you will, for evil, because in real life we have people whose brains are different. They can be potentially dangerous. I'm not saying all sociopaths are dangerous, by the way, not at all. But let's say like a combination of sociopathy with maybe the fact that to live you need to feed on people, and maybe if you don't feel bad about it, like like there's a combination on whatever. Like I'm not like a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but whatever combination you want. Like in real life, there's people who are wired in a way that there's serial killers or stuff like that. So it's not even like in real life we don't have examples of people whose brains work differently in a way that we would describe as evil. And again, I am not saying that sociopaths are automatically evil or anything like that. But I mean, in the example of vampires, the way they're explained is just they don't have things like remorse. And I think they mentioned that they, even the way they see time, past, present, and future is a bit different. Not in a supernatural sense, but okay, now I'm going by memory. I haven't read this book in a long time. It's a very, very heavy read. But if anyone wants to see an example of, just a biological explanation of an evil being that's not supernatural and it's done right and it's believable. Blindsight is a perfect example. Also, I got derailed with the whole talk about how the brain works and all that. But yeah, because it's true. You see, like people have like people who have nightmares and start like doing stuff while they're awake, and also while they're sleeping. So they're sleepwalking, but they're having like nightmares, and like you see, people have been filmed like they tear down their blinds from the windows, and then as they're still like sleepwalking, they put them back up and they go to sleep at a speed that the person is unable to replicate while awake. While awake, they cannot. If you take down the blinds, they cannot put them back up so fast. So just the fact of being aware of yourself takes a little room in your brain, believe it or not. Anytime you're doing a task, part of you is distracted. You know, like if you're hitting a nail with the hammer and you're also afraid of hitting your finger, you're not just thinking about how to position your finger to not hurt yourself, but you're also, maybe part of you is afraid of hitting your finger. Maybe part of you is wondering, wait, what time is it now? Yeah, there's a lot of things that get in the way, and there's a lot more knowledge in our brains that we give access to. So I tried the thing with the keys. It was really enlightening. How sometimes we just need to get out of the way of our brain, and we actually know the answers, or we actually know something about someone because our subconscious noticed body language that we just didn't pick up on because we're busy thinking about what the person said, and like, but we weren't paying attention to how they moved or how their facial micro expression told us. But part of our brain did. Anyway, it works. I'm not even kidding. If you are able to try that, it's pretty cool. But yeah, so you have an example, that's very legit as a scientific explanation, because in real life, like, look, there's serial killers, right? They work different than us, and it has nothing to do with race. It's just, now imagine if, but most humans are not wired that way. Most humans are not made that way. But what if there was a fantasy race that's that way? That their brains work differently, and it kind of happens to be behavior that we would find evil and abhorrent, or what if maybe they don't have as much guilt as us, kind of like certain cases in real life, and also the way they survive, like for example feeding blood or whatever it is, or maybe they're an evil god to appease in a more supernatural setting. What if that comes into play? Then why wouldn't they commit evil acts? Like, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So that was it. I think a lot of people are missing the point that evil fantasy races have their place, and they can even serve as allegories to represent whatever is bothering you, whatever evil is in the world that you can actually punch in the face. You can actually, whatever whatever frustration you have about injustice in the world, like, people are becoming so busy fighting those injustices, yes, but they become so busy fighting those injustices everywhere that now, and of course, again, I'm sure you can find examples where I would agree with you that's a problematic interpretation of evil fantasy race, but overall the idea itself is not problematic, because whatever behavior you find like problematic, aberrant, evil in society, you can create an evil fantasy race that represents it. It doesn't, and it's not like a real life human being. It's not, like, the same example, the same way Indiana Jones can shoot a Nazi, they shot they shot a racist who serves a dictator, like, yeah. So this idea, and or you people get it twisted, like the Yetis and the Forgotten Realms are the racist ones, are the anti-immigrant extremists. you know so yeah, keep looking for problems if you want, but be objective about the way you look for them. Anyway, and do your game however you want. If you don't, if you want to do a campaign where there's no such thing as an evil fantasy race, that's perfectly fine. But to go around telling people who use that trope, and that story device and that allegory, for example, in Warcraft, not Warcraft, sorry, in Warhammer, the medieval one, not 40k, in Warhammer, orcs represent like football hooligans or soccer for non-Europeans. So it has nothing to do with race. They just took the traits of like hardcore sports fan who caused trouble and gave them to orcs. That's just funny. It's an allegory, so yeah, just and continue if you see an example that's really badly done. Yes, call it out. Continue to call it out and to discuss it respectfully. But to anyone who says like, "Oh, the idea of an evil fantasy race is inherently racist," like, no, it isn't. I'm not gonna agree with you there. I'm not gonna begrudge you because you're coming at it from a good place, wanting to fight racism, which I 100% approve of. But you're in that case, you're actually attacking some people who are not racist at all, who would never have those inclinations, and might even have used the evil fantasy races um, to have this cathartic moment to fight against racism. Like what if the evil fantasy race in their setting is the one being super racist towards everyone else, enslaving everyone, and that's how they're set up. Then it's this cathartic. You can actually in your fantasy game fight against racism. It's in a super easy way that doesn't involve like real life laws and real life arguments about like, well, how do you handle this? How do you handle ignorance, lack of education, people having been told wrong by the people in power they trust? Like um, because also let's face it, like there's a big difference between the racist uncle stereotype and a Nazi. Like those are two very different things. So in real life, things get always messy. Like no, I don't think you should go into a place and like kill the racist uncle. I don't think you should do that. You should debate him or ignore him or whatever. But you don't go and attack someone for having bad beliefs. Real life is complex and nuanced. But if you're in World War II and you're killing a Nazi, you are fighting racism. You're fighting, like extremism. So again, it's the same thing. Okay. Yeah, that's all. This videos are really long, and I'm doing very long videos lately. I'm trying to make them shorter. So yeah, leave comments and let's debate this if you want. Thanks for watching.